On Sunday, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered generals to place the nation's nuclear weapons on high alert. It could be argued that Putin effectively signaled to the world that Russia was willing to utilize one or more of his 5,977 nuclear warheads if NATO forces become directly involved with the conflict in Ukraine. Nuclear arms expert and researcher at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research told the press that Putin's order doesn't necessarily mean that he is preparing for an imminent strike. Instead, it means that Russia is preparing to respond. We don't know all the details, how exactly it works, but you could use the analogy that in peacetime, the command control system is designed to be incapable of transmitting the order, Podvig said in an interview with Euronews. So if you press the button, then nothing will happen because the button is not connected to anything. This could explain why Putin used the words, high alert. No NATO troops, no nuclear war? President Joe Biden has refused to provide military support to Ukraine so far, sending troops to neighboring Baltic states instead to provide indirect support. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett also rejected pleas from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on a telephone call to provide arms to Ukraine. Senior U.S. officials reportedly told Israel that it would look favorably on Russia supplying weapons to Ukraine, although Israel chose only to condemn Russia at the United Nations and take no further steps. Israeli officials also claimed that Ukraine has increased the frequency of its requests for military equipment and intelligence over the last year, but despite being an ally, has not received any support. Israel and the West's refusal to get directly involved in this war prompted Zelensky to say last week to reject calls for him to evacuate. "I need ammunition, not a ride," he said at the outbreak of the invasion, a slogan that turned Zelensky into a household name and a hero in the eyes of many. The slogan is even being sold on T-shirts. With more than 1 million Ukrainians have fled the country so far, and potentially thousands killed by invading Russian forces, Western nations continue to provide arms but no send their own forces into the fray, suggesting that U.S. President Joe Biden and European leaders know very well that NATO involvement in the conflict could result in a global war. Can the United States defend itself against Russian warheads? Putin could technically cause the total destruction of the United States with his nation's nuclear warheads. The United States relies more on nuclear deterrence to defend itself against the Russian nuclear threat than it does through a sophisticated missile defense system. While there are 44 Homeland Interceptors in the United States, they would not be sufficient to protect against hundreds of nuclear missiles being directed at the United States. As the Heritage Foundation also points out, Russia's nuclear weapons are also critical to the country's desire to be treated as a world power. Using those weapons would guarantee either a Third World War or the end of Russia as a global power. Jack Buckby is a British author, counter-extremism researcher, and journalist based in New York. Reporting on the UK, Europe, and the US, he works to analyze and understand left-wing and right-wing radicalization, and report on Western governments' approaches to the pressing issues of today. His books and research papers explore these themes and propose pragmatic solutions to our increasingly polarized society. Russian President Vladimir Putin has put his country's nuclear forces on heightened alert, citing aggressive statements by NATO leaders on Ukraine. While some analysts caution that Putin would be willing to do whatever it takes to achieve his aims, others say the chilling warning does not necessarily indicate his intention to press the nuclear button. Russia, home to the world's largest stockpile of nuclear warheads, is not shy about using them. Such appears to be the message coming from the Kremlin as it grapples with mounting condemnation of its war in Ukraine and unexpectedly stiff resistance on the ground. On Monday, Russia's defense ministry said its strategic missile forces had begun to carry out combat duty with reinforced personnel. The move came a day after Putin ordered the country's deterrence forces, which include nuclear arms, to be placed on a special regime of combat duty. While the cryptic language has puzzled analysts, all agree that the Russian leader's menacing words had at least one clear intention: to up the pressure on opponents both in Kyiv and in the West. It's a way for Vladimir Putin to flex Russia's nuclear muscles, said Polina Synovets, the head of the Ukraine-based Odessa Center for Nonproliferation, in an interview with France 24. The world's biggest nuclear arsenal, Moscow certainly has the means to plunge the world into nuclear catastrophe, whether by accident or design. With around 6,000 nuclear warheads, Russia has the world's largest stockpile of weapons, larger even than the U.S. military's estimated 5,500 warheads. Some 1,600 Russian warheads are already deployed, either on land or on board nuclear submarines, according to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which famously keeps track of the Doomsday Clock, a Cold War relic that conveys scientists' views on the likelihood of humanity destroying itself, currently still at 100 seconds to midnight. Russia also has an ample supply of short, medium and long-range missiles capable of carrying the warheads. There are around 2,000 tactical missiles that can be used in regional conflicts, that are capable of striking Ukraine, and a further 1,597 long-range strategic ballistic missiles, said Synovets. If Russia were to use nuclear weapons in the Ukraine war, it would probably not stop at short-range missiles, added Nikolai Sakov, an expert in Russian nuclear capabilities at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Nonproliferation. However, both analysts played down the risk of an imminent Russian nuclear strike. Instead, Putin's threat should be understood as a political signal, said Sakov, a former advisor to the Soviet and Russian foreign ministers between 1987 and 1992. Putin's message is primarily aimed at the Ukrainians, to put pressure on their negotiators as they hold initial talks with Russian delegates, added Raphael Loss, a nuclear policy expert at the European Council on Foreign Relations. It's a way of stating just how far Moscow is prepared to go if Kyiv refuses to give in, he told France 24. At the same time, Putin is warning Western leaders that he is ready to contemplate the nuclear option should they attempt to intervene militarily in Ukraine, Loss said. How high is heightened alert? The cryptic language used by the Kremlin has made it difficult to assess the extent to which Putin has altered the nuclear equation. As Sakov noted, the trouble with Putin's move is that it does not match any of the scenarios that justify the use of deterrence forces under Russian nuclear doctrine. In June 2020, Putin himself signed a document clarifying Russia's nuclear doctrine and listing 4 scenarios for the use of nuclear deterrence. All 4 are defensive and none envisages the use of nuclear weapons in an invasion, such as the conflict in Ukraine, or in retaliation for sanctions. West slams escalatory Putin order to put nuclear forces on alert. The most likely understanding of Putin's order is that it allows command and control systems to remain on alert, shorten delays and simplify procedures for missile launches, said Loss. When it comes to nuclear escalation, there are many more steps to take, he added. If Putin really wanted to up the ante, he would start by directly mentioning nuclear weapons, which he hasn't done yet. According to the experts France 24 spoke to, such an escalation would result in nuclear missiles being loaded onto bombers and submarines equipped with nuclear warheads leaving port, all of which would almost certainly be visible on satellite imagery. Even then, Synovets cautioned, a heightened nuclear threat would only work as diplomatic blackmail, because Putin is well aware that if he uses nuclear weapons, Moscow would probably be bombed as well. Risk of tragic accident. If the aim was to scare opponents in Kyiv and in the West, it seems Putin's gamble has failed to pay off. Asked if Americans should be worried about nuclear war, U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday offered a calm no in response, while both the State Department and NATO have said they see no reason to change their own nuclear alert levels. As for Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, he hasn't even mentioned Putin's nuclear threat. To extract concessions, the Russian leader may be tempted to voice more explicit threats in the coming days, Loss warned, stressing that Putin finds himself in a tight spot both in Ukraine and on the international stage. International sanctions are getting steeper by the day and the military offensive isn't going quite as well as planned, leaving Putin with few advantages other than nuclear arms, he explained. However, Sakov cautioned that nuclear threats come at a heavy cost for the Russian president, shattering his image as a ruthless, but rational, strategist. Resorting to nuclear threats in the context of the Ukraine war is a terrible mistake that will do a lot of damage to Putin and Russia, he said. Putin will come across as someone who is erratic, dangerous, and all too eager to brandish the nuclear threat. This will only increase Russia's isolation on the international stage. Alarmingly, Russia's nuclear escalation generates a climate of uncertainty in which a tragic accident could happen, Sakov added. He noted that a significant share of Russia's missiles are designed to car